Hey there everyone, and welcome to the Mregamers Academy. I'm Monk7Mad, and today we are doing some selections. Now, from the previous two videos, I've been working in CS5, and I've recently acquired CS6, so we're going to be working in that today. Now, we're going to be doing some pretty basic selections. I'm going to be using this image here, which is of a jet, just so that you get the basic gist of how to use the tools, what the tools primarily are for. We're going to push forward next week and do a few more of the tools, and then when we get out of the tools section, then we can actually start editing images properly. And as I always say in the other videos, if you're interested in seeing a little bit more advanced stuff at the moment, head over to my channel. I'll put the link in the description, but for those that are still in the basic scenario, this is the perfect place to be. Okay, so we've got three main selection tools. So we've got what's known as the marquee tool here, which is the square shape, and we've got a lasso beneath it, and finally we have quick selection. Now, any tool, well, in general in Photoshop, with a little arrow in the corner, when you opposite click on it, it shows you more options that it has available, so it means there's more there than what's just shown. Now, the marquee tool is the most basic selection tool, and basically the way that the marquee tool works is going to be exactly the same. And I want to point out in advance that each of the selection tools have four options at the top. Now, the first one is called new selection. Now, the new selection means every time that you click, it'll make a new selection. At the moment, I have a box, and it's shown by what's known as the ant line. And the way this works is, if I was to draw right now, you can see it won't go outside the box because that is the selectioned area. Now, if I'd say made that selection and I wanted to do another selection, the second I click my mouse, this says new selection, so it removes the old one. Now, for some of you that might not be enough. For some of you it might be a case of maybe wanting to have two bits selected at once, in which case you're going to need to go to the next option, which is called add to subtraction. Add to selection, not add to subtraction. And what this does is, instead of removing this square, or perhaps the circle, or whatever you've used, it will just add another one, and it will keep adding and adding and adding, and you can join ones together like so. And let's say you've done a bit too much of the selections and you want to remove a bit, but you don't have to redraw the whole shape. There's the subtract from selection, which allows you to remove bits that have already been selected. And like the adding one, you can keep subtracting as many times as you want. Now, the final one is called intersect. Now, this one is probably the most confusing one, and one that people struggle to sort of explain. And what it basically is if you have a selection, so maybe one selection or two selections, you can only edit that. You can't add another selection, you can't subtract. You can only modify the ones that you have. I mean, at the moment, if I try drawing over here, it will do nothing. In fact, it will just remove everything because it doesn't understand. But if I wanted to, let's say, keep part of this box and this box, if I draw through both, it will keep the bit that I select, and that's basically how it works. Now, there are ways of getting out of this. Now, when you've sort of drawn the box and you want to do another thing, maybe rub something out on the page, you can't do anything until these have been removed. They will single-handedly block you off. Now, you can get rid of it in several ways. You can either go back to new selection and just click on the page to remove it. You could go to layer and, sorry, not layer, we'll go to select and deselect, or you could press the shortcut, which is Control and D. Okay, now that's out of the way, you get the gist, hopefully, of what these are. So we've got a square, we can draw a square. We have a circle, which is a circle, and if you press shift while using any of these tools, it will make something called a perfectly proportioned shape, which means that the same height and width is shown throughout. So it's basically an even shape. Okay, next is the lasso tool, and like the marquee tool at the top, it has the four options. Now, with this one, the first lasso tool is one that you freehand draw, so you have to draw it yourself. Wherever you draw, the lasso will follow. Unfortunately, I am an absolutely appalling drawer. I'm just going to do this roughly because it's not really that important at the moment. But hopefully you get the gist that this is one that you draw yourself. Now, the other lasso tools available are the polygon lasso, which is one where you click, and when you click your mouse between points and where you click, Photoshop will automatically draw a line. So I click a point there, point, 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 and you see it starts to automatically draw it. Now the thing about selections is they always have to be complete, and by complete I mean if you wanted to select this wing, for example, to make Photoshop understand that you're selecting the whole wing, you have to join the selection up. So I started up here in the top right, and you can see the mouse just changes slightly, so it's got a little circle next to it, and when you click it makes the whole selection. If you don't make the selection, as in if you don't sort of go around the whole thing, then Photoshop will get confused. If you forget where your point is, it becomes a little bit more troublesome, because what you can do is you can actually double click and it will automatically join it together, but it will go in a straight line exactly to where the point is. So it might cut off a bit of the selection, but you might have to add it in after anyway. The final lasso tool is called the magnetic lasso tool, and this a lot of people like. Personally, not my favourite. I think it can be quite inaccurate. But if you're doing sort of rough selections, this is quite good. The idea of the magnetic lasso tool is it uses Photoshop's colour, its colour detection, to identify where the shape is. So if I just, without clicking, I can just move around. I mean, you can click and add in certain points of your own, but it will draw around. So it's saying, the plane wing is different to the blue sky, and it knows this, and it tries to connect it, but it will always miss bits out. It's not 100% accurate, but it's not bad for rough selection. Okay, and finally we have the quick selection tool. Now the quick selection tool is one that you can modify a bit more. This is a bit more like a paintbrush, and by this I mean you can adjust the size of this selection. So the bigger the size, the more it will try and pick up randomly. And the way this works is you just draw over sort of what you want, and it will try and interpret sort of like the magnetic lasso tool, but it'll do it slightly differently. Obviously, the smaller the size of this tool here, which you can adjust through the size panel at the top by clicking on the drop down arrow and modifying the size. The smaller the size, the more fine details it will pick up. And that's pretty much how that would work. And like the others, it has a subtraction, except this one is the only one that doesn't have an intersect option, which, to be honest, for most of you I don't really think is a problem, but you know, I just thought I'd point it out. But this is quite a good one, again, for rough selection. And finally, beneath the quick selection is something called the magic wand tool, which some of you may have heard of. And this basically is an auto click, which it can look pretty rough. As you can see here, it's trying to pick everything it'll only pick the exact colour. So if you've got, say, a vector, which is let's say a silhouette, actually, that's probably a better example. You've got a person, you've got one colour, so maybe they're a silhouette completely black in a green background or something. You can then select that, say the background, for example, easily, because it'll identify that one colour. But this is probably the least accurate selection tool, in my opinion, for what I like to do. But for working with things like silhouettes or one colour exactly, I mean one exact same colour, then this is probably the best. Anyway, that's pretty much how the selection works. The idea then is, if you have a newer version of Photoshop like this, you can actually modify your selections, and I'm only going to briefly go into this. If you're interested in learning a bit more about modifying your selection, then you'll have to let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, you know, it'd just be a waste of time for both you and me. Okay, so I'm going to try and roughly draw this. I'm doing this with the polygon lasso tool. Although I regret this choice now, I probably should have gone with quick selection tool for speed. Okay, so I'm just very basically drawing around it in a horrible style. Hopefully you'll spend a lot more time than I am to make this look accurate. And obviously the more complex the shape, then the longer it will take, or the longer it should take. Okay, so I've made the selection there. If you opposite click on your selection, and I think this is only applying to CS5 onwards, I don't think it's in CS4. There's something called redefine edge, and if you click on that, there's something called the view mode, And what this does is it removes the background so you can see what you're doing. Now the way this works is it's got something called edge detection, and when you click on the smart radius option here, checkbox it, it will say a radius, and you can drag the dial up the radius, and what it does is it tries to adjust around the shape that you've made. Obviously the more brutal you go, which means the larger the radius, then more it will cut out of Photoshop. Some of it will make it look a bit pixelated, sometimes it can be a bit too much. Sometimes you might want to just go, let's say about 5 or something, and then try to adjust the edge with things like feathering or contrasting it to sort of tone it out, or maybe even shifting the edge back and forth. And you can decontaminate it if you want to, which tries to modify the colouring. And then you just click OK, and then you have a selection. And then if you want to go really fine-tuned, then you draw around it a lot neater. And this is also how you do things like rendering. And if you're interested in learning how to do renders, it's pretty much the same as this, but again, let me know in the comment section below. So that's pretty much it for today's tutorial. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Don't forget to come back to the Mregamers Academy, where we will be continuing with the tools. Next week we will be having a look at the basics of probably how to use the brush effectively, then clone stamps, and a bit of dodge and burn, and then that's pretty much going to be it on the basics. And then we might start pushing forward to edit pictures and stuff like that. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I hope to see you again here at the Mregamers Academy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Take care.